Test, test.
Perfect. We're good to go.
All right. Full speed ahead. I absolutely love this, but I absolutely hate it. Because you guys are all expected to go full speed. Your contractors are expected to go full speed because we've got this huge influx of money. All the people want you to go faster. Everybody wants broadband faster. But there are some hurdles, some major hurdles still for you guys to be able to go full speed. Whether it is the training, getting people educated on how to use equipment, how to build out your network, or getting materials. There are some major obstacles you have to overcome. My name's Joe Valen. I'm with Millennium Rentals and Leasing. I love telecom. I'm passionate about it. I'm especially passionate about the education part. To show you how passionate I am, my family is sitting on a beach in Gulf Shores right now. My wife is with 4 kids, and I got on a plane last night, landed here at 11, and I'm hopping on the plane at 11 o'clock today to go back because I love this so much. And I believe that there is a major problem in our industry of we've got products, you guys got issues, we are not doing our job connecting products to solutions. So that's why I'm here to help connect some of those dots. Now, as I'm talking, I guarantee there's somebody in here who knows more about everything that I am talking about today. What I bring to the table is maybe a colorful story, maybe a little bit of BS, but my experience, I've got some experience being in the field. I've got some formal training with the Light Brigade, but some familiar faces in here. I have gone to hundreds and hundreds of telcos, sat and done 4-hour hands-on trainings, and I've learned from you guys. So I'm confident that there are experts who can talk more intelligibly about anything I talk about today. But I'm going to bring you guys a colorful story to hopefully help you further understand what you're working on and what you're doing. Full speed ahead. All right, I think you've seen this stuff. This is our guideline of where we're going. All right, when I go to a bar or get together at a family reunion, you've got your teachers talking about how they're having issues with transgender kids in bathrooms. You've got firefighters talking about how they're saving lives. And then they turn to me and say, what do you do for a living? Like, I help build the internet. But you know what? It is pretty fascinating. With one strand of fiber, one singular strand of fiber, in theory, City of Urbandale can download Field of Dreams in 1 second. That's insane. With one strand of fiber. Now, what is one strand of fiber? That's another thing that a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their head around that might not be in our industry or exposed to working on these individual strands of fiber every day. That the core of fiber optic cable is 9 micron. That's crazy small, and that is what these 45,000 people dying to watch Field of Dreams in Urbandale are downloading. That is where all the data is riding on, in that core. So the core is 9 micron. Our eyes can only see 5 micron. Sorry, 50 micron or larger. All right, hair size. Actually here, who wants to shout out, what's the correct answer here, bigger to smaller? So what's the biggest? To the left, smallest to the right. 1, 2, or 3. So it goes hair, fiber core, spider web, or dust. Average size dust, hair, core, spider web. Hair, average dust, fiber core, spider web. Any guesses? What's biggest? Hair is biggest, yes. Then, any other guesses? Dust, yep. Spider web or core? Spider web or core? Core. So number 3. So spider web is about 5 micron. But it's insane. You guys are out in the field. You are melting that glass together, and it is just barely bigger than a spider web, connecting 45,000 people to download Field of Dreams all at once. It's insane. When I was in middle school, I know I might look like I'm 25 and who the heck is this guy, but when I was in middle school, we had dial-up. 56K, it would take 401 minutes to download Field of Dreams. All right, so core and cladding. I think a lot of us might know this already, so I don't want to bore you, but let's put this in perspective. The core is the yellow dot in this picture, 9 micron for single mode. For multi-mode, it's either 50 micron or 62.5 micron. We don't deal with that a whole ton, right? The cladding is 125 micron for both of those. To put this in perspective, the Statue of Liberty, 151 feet tall. If we were to stand next to it, we're 6 feet tall. That's about the same scale. So with that analogy, we're that person 6 feet tall standing up next to the Statue of Liberty. Yes, anybody doing math, that's not exact, but pretty darn close. The core is extremely small relative to the cladding. All right, we're diving a little bit into the weeds. So the core and the cladding is the same no matter what type of cable construction we're looking at. Doesn't matter, it's going to be the same inside of each one of those cables. All the way to the left, that's our single armor, single jacket cable. That's got, these are all 144 count cables, and at the bottom you'll see the outside diameters for reference. But with that 144 count cable, we've got 12 buffer tubes. Inside of each buffer tube is 12 individual fibers that are the same color pattern within each buffer tube. Again, a lot of us maybe know that. The pulling tensile strength, this is kind of the standard for outside plant cable. 600 pounds is pretty standard tensile pulling strength. That becomes relevant when we're talking about installation and when you have a new subcontractor on site and they're using their mini track tied directly to that cable. The next cable on here, 0.51 inches, ribbon fiber. So ribbon fiber, show of hands, who's using ribbon fiber, traditional ribbon fiber? 1, 2? All right, ribbon fiber, it is going to be used mostly for reducing your splicing costs and getting a little bit more density within your network. You are going to be able to splice 12 fibers at once. They're glued together. So some of the issues and headaches of why maybe a lot of hands weren't up when we said who uses ribbon, you're using this traditional loose tube because it's easier to access a singular fiber. So when you have a splice assignment that tells you splice number 7 to splice number 38, you don't have to go peel inside middle of that ribbon to go grab your fiber. So a little bit harder to work with, but obviously not impossible. There's millions and millions of miles of ribbon fiber installed. One thing to note on ribbon fiber is that every single ribbon splice is clad alignment. What does that mean? That means that on average, it's going to have a higher loss splice, about a 0.01 dB per splice when it comes to what the machine's telling you. So that is something when your network's being designed, somebody's building a light budget, and that's accounted for up front. With that also, at least once a week I get this question of, hey, can I splice single fibers with my ribbon machine? Yes, absolutely you can, but it's going to be a whole lot slower, so don't plan on doing a 144 count cable with it. And 2, it is still going to be a clad alignment splice. It's still going to have a higher loss. So that is something that every single week I end up having that conversation of why somebody has high loss splices on their main line. All right, so ribbon, traditional ribbon. Next up is microfiber, 0.31 inches right here. So a lot of people will call this the spiral cable. And on the jacket, you'll see that spiral pattern. And the reason we do that, smaller jacket, you're able to get in more density. Some of this, the individual strands of fiber are wrapped in a coating that's 200 micron, all to get smaller density. But this is a cable that's probably been widely adapted just because it's so familiar to your standard single armor, single jacket, loose tube cable. One thing to note, if you see the spiral, you shouldn't be pulling it unless you go check the specs. The pull and tensile strength on most of these micro cables are going to be about 200 pounds. Some of them 300, and you can order extra heavy duty ones where they are 600. But please, if you see the spiral jacket, go check that spec sheet. Otherwise, you're going to have some major loss in your network. All right, the last one before we move on here is a spider web cable right here. So spider web cable is another type of microfiber, and it's really the offspring of a traditional microfiber with a ribbon fiber. With the spider web cable, we have bundles of 12 fibers woven together, and you are able to splice these 12 at a time, like a traditional ribbon fiber. So you can have your main line, this one's a little manipulated, but you can have your main line be spliced 12 fibers at a time and reap the rewards of less expensive splice costs, but you can easily pick apart. If you need to splice fiber number 7, all you gotta do is pull this apart, snip it, and you can access your drop or your lateral fiber real easily. This cable, you'll see the OD of it. So these are all 144s, as I mentioned. The OD of it's 0.41 inches, so it's a tenth bigger than that traditional ribbon. Where this fiber really starts reaping its rewards, so when you start going up and count 864s, all of a sudden it's half the size of what a traditional ribbon fiber would be. All right. So back to the core and the cladding within that cable. So the core, what is it? The core is that yellow part on that first picture. That is pure glass, right? We know that that's pure glass, and it has a high index of refraction. The cladding, which is at 125 micron, that's hugging the bullseye, that's hugging the core, that's got a lower index of refraction. Sometimes I wonder why I talk about this. Because it's maybe not the most relevant when it comes to you testing your network or working on your network. But it really is kind of the magic behind light transmission. So I do like to talk about it and bring it up. So refraction, you dip a pencil into the water and it looks like the pencil bends, right? So the core, it bends at a higher angle than the cladding. And because of that, when the when the light hits that border of the core and the cladding that has different index of refractions, it bounces. This is what we're looking for right here. And this is called total internal reflection, because all that light is being reflected in. In the cases where the light is not reflecting in, we have to the left here, and that's because the angle of the light hitting that core cladding boundary is going into the cladding. It was critical angle was exceeded. So the index of refraction, the difference of those is what is creating light being able to propagate down the core. All right, wavelength. So I always change up. I'm a tweaker. I love to mess with my presentations, and I probably do a really bad job at it, but I'm trying to improve, so please, patience. So wavelengths. We've got Roman towers. This is the first time I ever used this, so you guys can boo me if this is really bad, all right? So long time ago, really it's the start of binary code, but I want to try to show and illustrate how we are using the wavelengths to send information, to send data. Long time ago, we would have these towers, and they would start a fire on top of the tower, and the other tower would see that fire. That would say, whatever, Alexander the Great is coming. I clearly know nothing about history, but they would use that fire to signal some issue was happening. And then what they found out was Alexander the Great, or whoever historical figure, could also see that fire. So then they put the fire at the bottom of these towers, and then they put a piece of glass at the top to aim that signal of light. And then they started creating pulses to signal yes, no, their own message system. So those messages of fire on, fire off, fire on, fire off became information, much like Morse code. Morse code just built on that. So now we're talking wavelengths. And this is the medium for passing that information. Within that wavelength, we're passing packets of a whole bunch of ones and zeros that are those same signals that are being shot from tower to tower. Is that good or bad? Should I toss that one out? Okay? All right. We got a couple of head nods. All right. We're going to fine-tune that. But this is what a wavelength looks like. On our next graphic, we'll see it as well. But this is cycling from a really long wavelength to a shorter wavelength. And this is truly how light is reflecting within the core. This is a picture from FOA, so if they're here, you cannot sue me. All right. Wavelengths. I've been using this analogy for too long, right? You've seen this one before, Charlie. All right, so wavelengths. With multi-mode, we have low wavelengths. With single mode, we have longer wavelengths. In this picture, that red line's a little bit hard to see, but each one of these is making, I believe it's 5 cycles. And you'll notice the distance from the LED or the laser. On the laser, the distance is a lot longer. The LEDs, it's a lot shorter. These wavelengths with LEDs are at a much smaller wavelength. 850 nanometers is how we measure wavelengths. Our eyes, like this red light that I'm using is probably about 650 nanometers. That's about the edge of where we can see light. So with that, I guess it's a safety notice of if you are working on live fiber and if you want to know if it's active or not, looking into it will not help. If you do have somebody who spends a lot of time at the bar and forgets things, maybe get them some safety glasses. You can filter out live light with safety glasses if you end up needing that. All right, so back to wavelength. So 850 is a real hyper wavelength. 1625 is a real long wavelength. I like to make an analogy of 850. This is a motorcycle, and in particular, 1976 Ducati GT750. So that motorcycle, that's going to be fun to ride. Motorcycle guy? All right. You're just like, you're crazy. All right. So that motorcycle or that wavelength, 850, or that motorcycle, it's real hyper. So when it is going, let's say, downtown one-way street here in Des Moines, and it comes to a dead end, it's going to be able to pull a U-turn no problem. It's very nimble. However, it's not going to be the greatest ride for going cross-country. 1310, now this is a single-mode wavelength, right? A lot of us here are transmitting 1310, 1550, some of you 1490 as well. So 1310, it's going to be this El Camino. This still is a pretty nimble light. Downtown Des Moines, we could probably whip sideways to get through that same one-way dead end that we need to turn around in. However, 1550, that becomes a little bit more troublesome. That's a longer wavelength. It takes a longer distance to get from here to here than 1310 from here to here. This distance is a shorter distance for 1310. So it takes a longer time for it to cycle, for it to propagate. This becomes relevant when we start thinking about testing and why we're testing at multiple wavelengths and how to look at graphs. Now 1625 is up there too. We usually don't transmit at 1625. That's kind of an out-of-band spectrum. This is another slide where you really don't need to know this, and maybe it's pretty trivial. But the reason I bring this up is that 1310 and 1550, so 1310's over here to the left, 1550s over here to the right. We transmit at those wavelengths because inherently with the glass that we are working with, there is less attenuation, less inherent loss within that fiber cable. So 1625, you'll notice is not even on here. It's to the right still. 1625 is out of band wavelength that we work with, and there's also 1650. And that's becoming a little bit more normalized when it comes to OTDR specifications and for testing out of band. The reason is that we are with the next generation PON, XGS PON, we are starting to work in wavelengths that are in this 1550 to 1600 window. This is becoming more normalized with the next generation of electronics. So testing at 1625 is starting to get pretty close to live traffic. So a lot of people are now kind of using 1650 as a standard out-of-band spec. So maybe if that's one thing you walk away with today, that'd be a good one, is if speccing out OTDR, go with 1650 for your out-of-band network. That'll ensure that in 5 years, 10 years down the road that you should be able to test over your live network without disrupting live traffic. The second takeaway on this screen is right here, this giant spike. So traditionally, if you were to operate your network at this 1360 to 1430 band, you would have a whole ton of loss with your network. So your inherent loss with your fiber cable would be through the roof. So instead of a half dB per kilometer, you're talking 2 dBs kilometer. Not to say that you couldn't operate there, but you would then have to shorten your span a lot. Instead of 30 miles, now 15 miles or less. So with that being said, we have new fiber. It's not even that new, a couple years now. 652, zero water peak cable. That bridges this gap. This creates the lower loss as well. So as we're all scrambling to find materials, and you're maybe looking at a brand or a spec that you haven't used before when it comes to fiber, ensure that you're still using zero water peak if this is something that's mainline or lateral construction. Again, it helps you kind of future-proof your network and make sure that you don't have this excessive loss. All right, so we've talked about the core, the light going through the core, the size of the core, how this El Camino and semi-truck work within the core. And now we've reached the end of the cable. We've got connectors now. And with connectors, they're a pretty big problem. And it's maybe hard to find specs on the problems you guys experience in your network. And I bet right now if we took a survey, the problems would be getting materials or getting qualified help. But when it comes to our physical plant, this is from like 6-7 years ago, so it's old. I apologize. I can't find any new numbers. But the bulk of our problems are connector related. Contamination of the connector, poor polishing of the ferrule, damage to the connector, damage to the ferrule end face. Most of the network issues are going to be connector related. It's kind of funny to look at this and you look at the cable installer. They're like, it's all messed up. This whole entire network is jacked. We've got macro bends, crappy routing, bad splicing. It's end of the world. But the network owner's a little bit more calm about this, and they don't think that any of the work they've done is wrong as far as the routing goes and labeling the cables. We don't make mistakes. So, all right, so connectors. Blue or green? This is also like every single week I have to go through this explanation of connectors. Often, like before doing a presentation like this, I'm nervous as hell to present to you guys because like I said earlier, I know that there's somebody in here is like, I could say that better. I know more about that connector. I know more about that OTDR. So I get nervous about this stuff, but I also get reminded every single week when I get these phone calls that not everybody knows this stuff. So blue versus green. So these two connectors right here are the same shape. They're just different colors. I have been to numerous telcos, none in Iowa, of course. None in Iowa. This is a great state. We'll blame the Minnesota telcos. So I've been to a lot of Minnesota telcos where they think that this might be a Toyota and this might be a Ford. So they plug a blue into a green because it's got the same shape. But the colors in telecom always mean something. Whether it's this jacketing right here, this means something. This tells me that this is single mode, or these connectors. Whenever we have different colored stuff, they are not going to be compatible. So, blue versus green. We've got APC connectors. I bet most of you are used to seeing these connectors right here. A lot of times these APC connectors are used in outside plant. Excuse me. The APC connectors, they have right here, they have a 8-degree angle. And the reason that these have an 8-degree angle is to reduce reflection. It becomes especially important to reduce this reflection when we are running triple play, when we're operating on 1490. We want to keep reflection as low as possible. So a lot of times you see APC, SC APC connectors spec'd out everywhere. The one bad thing about SC APC connectors is that they're a little bit harder to clean because of that angle. So we can introduce error if somebody is not aware of how to identify where that 8-degree angle is on that ferrule tip. UPC connectors. You can't see my writing, but a UPC connector is always going to be blue, and the end face of it is flat. So when the light hits that, the light is reflecting straight back to the optics and causing confusion. And we're going to see what that confusion looks like when it comes to power on a OTDR tray shortly. So the way I like to remember this, because a lot of people have a difficult time with what blue is or what green is, they just call up, say, I want the big blue connector. Like, holy smokes, what's the big blue? The big blue is the SCUPC. So with UPC, the way I remember this, blue is blunt. It's a flat end, clean end face. It's flat. Blue is blunt. And green, I just have to remember it. I don't know if anybody else has any clever way to remember it. I don't. With this reflection analogy I like to use from APC to UPC to try to simplify it outside of just these random red arrows pointing in random directions is if you were in a hotel and they had one of those updraft windows where you got to push it down, or you push it out and it angles out and you just get whatever 3-inch gap of air coming through. When you're looking out that window and it's closed, so it's flat, you see a reflection of yourself, right? You have to kind of refocus your eyes to look out at the beautiful skyline of Des Moines, right? But with that window, once you open that up, pop it out, you don't see a reflection of your ugly face my ugly face. You guys are beautiful. You don't see a reflection of your face anymore, and it's easier for your eyes to focus on that beautiful skyline that you want it to look at. Same thing happens with our optics. Light's not coming right back at its eyes. It's easier for it to focus, essentially. All right, so one more thing on this slide before I hop away is on the left, we have a SC APC connector. So every connector, we have to first choose the ferrule, whether it's APC or UPC. Then we have to choose the body. The body is the shape of the connector. And that is not signified by color at all. It's just the shape of the connector. So most standard in our industry, it's the SC APCs. And this is the bigger stick and clicks or Sam Charlies. And then we have the LC connectors, little connector, Larry Charlie connectors. A lot of times these are being used inside plant, and these are being used inside plant for density. Most of the time, we are not using LC connectors in outside plant because most of you guys have big bare hands. I've got small third grade boy hands. So when it comes to cleaning these end faces, all LC connectors have a ferrule that is 1.25 millimeters. This SC connector is 2.5. So these ferrules can be damaged a little bit easier when we're using our big bare paws to clean those. So a lot of times those are used inside plant, and very rarely are they SCAPC unless you have a clear field cabinet. Anybody have SCAPC outside plant in their cabinet? All right, that's another Minnesota thing. Those guys are weird. All right, more on connectors. Man, connectors, they are so fun. So here's another picture of the different ferrule sizes. Can you connect a SC UPC to LC UPC? Can you do it? Is it possible? I see a no, couple no's. It's possible. It's possible because we have two flat surfaces, so those will mate together. We're going to need a special adapter to make those work. But they will transmit, and there will not be any excessive loss associated with it because just because this ferrule is 1.25 and this one is 2.5, inside of that, going back to that first screen with that dartboard, that core is 9 micron, the cladding's 125. That holds true in both of these. We can line those up. So with the end faces, they're both blue, they're both flat, they can be mated together. Can a SCAPC be mated with a SCUPC? That's a strong no. That's a strong no. That is equivalent of a demo derby and somebody having a Volkswagen with a flat bumper and then somebody else having, let's use that El Camino again, and a big unicorn spike on the front of it. That unicorn spike is our SCAPC connector, and that Volkswagen with that small flat bumper is our SCUPC. So which one's going to win? The SCAPC is going to crush that SCUPC. It might sound like my 7-year-old boy playing Legos right now or something, but when we plug these connectors into each other, I've seen different numbers on this. The stat that I've heard the most is 30,000 PSI when that connector snaps in. So when that 8-degree angle is smashing into that UPC connector, that flat surface, 30,000 PSI, that can crack it in one click. Now I know for a fact some people in here have had these connectors mated, and yes, there will be some transmission after time, especially if you connect them multiple times, you're going to lose your light levels. But you're going to have a bad splice and a crack, and we'll see what a crack looks like on the OTDR tray soon. Okay, the last one right here. Manufacturers love to talk about these connectors, and they get used a lot in data centers. I think that's starting to trickle a little bit into COs. I don't want to talk about them a whole ton. MPOs. This connector, there's 2 bands of light gray fibers in between those pins right here. That's a 24 count MPO connector. So to accomplish the same, we would need 24 of these connectors. So this would take up a whole lot more space. So if you're concerned about density at your CO, MPO connectors are out there in APC, UPC fashions, and you can get them 12 fiber, 24 fiber, 18 fiber, whatever. Just know that's available. All right, fiber connectors still. Who's excited? Who loves this? I love this. I left my family for this. I love this. All right, connectors. We're going to talk about cleaning methods and inspection. Again, a manufacturer, they're going to tell you to use an inspection probe each and every single time you touch a connector. Whether you're about to plug it in, whether you're unplugging it, whether it's going into your OTDR, every single time you need to inspect your connector. Is that practical? No, I like to live a little bit more in the shades of gray. So best cleaning practices, every single time, at least do your one click. At a very minimum, one click both ends. What you're about to plug in and what you're plugging into. One click them, both ends, please. That's a minimum. Now I'm going to talk about when we have connectors that are troublesome, either we're going to cut it out or we're going to try cleaning it. And this is a sequence that I did a couple years back I took my nasty finger, I think I got a bunch of tape on it and like put it on my dirty workbench, and I put it on a connector. Then I scoped it using this inspection probe. By the way, thank you Dave Malinowski for the gear and the lanyards with the BTG logo. All right, so my first step was doing a dry clean. So I just took out that one-click cleaner. So if you have a really dirty, troublesome connector and you take out your one-click cleaner, it does a pretty good job. Now, a lot of these inspection probes that are on the market today, they have their own pass-fail thresholds. And you can change them to whatever standards you want, because out of the box, they're going to be pretty picky. So with this picture here, from a field perspective, looking at this, I'd be like, you know what? Let's get this customer up. Maybe we'll deal with this when our contractor comes back and they can go splice a bunch of houses, new pigtails in. Because when I look at this, the core does not have any dirt on it. If there is any dirt on that core, that should be a re-clean or a cutout. All right, so one-click cleaner. Everybody does this. We just keep doing one-click cleaners over and over. One click, didn't work. 5 clicks, let's do it again. Here's our 7-click, let's do it again. All right, finally, we realize this connector is not getting dirty. Let's bring out the alcohol, right? And not last night's alcohol. We're going to use the highest percentage alcohol, 99.9% isopropyl. We always want to use that. Don't use your splicing alcohol. A lot of times that's like 95%. That's got more water on it. And when you use that, and a lot of times that sits in a trailer for a long time or in your shop a long time, it absorbs water over time. And then when you go to clean, it gets more streaky like this. So with cleaning, doing a wet clean, 99% isopropyl alcohol or higher. Whenever you do a wet clean, which I did right here, and I think I used lint-free wipes, whenever you do that wet clean, if you were to just go and be like, all right, well, I used Windex cleaning my windshield now. Well, you still have to go back, and you always follow up a wet clean with a dry clean. Here is my wet clean. Here's one click right here, still a little bit dirty. And then finally, I did a second dry clean with my one-click cleaner, and we have a clean connector. So a manufacturer might argue that, hey, instead of doing all these steps, why don't you just bring out the inspection probe the first time and see how you should properly clean this? Just start with your wet-dry method. It's not always most practical for everybody to have an inspection probe on their trucks. It's not the most affordable thing in the world. So I understand why we aren't inspecting everything. So walk away on this one is, with those stubborn connectors, always start with a dry clean. And when you have a stubborn connector, if you do a wet clean, always follow up with a dry clean. Wet clean should not be done by itself. All right, testing tools. So this kind of relays on from the inspection probe. The inspection probes. There are tons of different inspection probes on the market. You can get an inspection probe where it is like a microscope where you have to dial it in by hand to be able to see your end face. Do they work? Absolutely. You can see your end face and you can see if there's dirt on the core or not. Will it tell you if it pass-fails? No. So why get one that tells you if it pass-fails? Well, labor is hard to find right now. Let's give them tools so that maybe we don't need somebody as qualified or as experienced to be able to interpret something. So the next level is those inspection probes that will tell you if a connector pass fails. There are ones on the market where your end face is captured right here on the screen. There are some that will Bluetooth to your phone. Lots of options on that. All right, so outside of the inspection probe, thinking about your installation crews, a mechanical connector. How many people are using mechanical connectors for their installs currently? Is there anybody using them? Okay, most people do fusion splice. That's normal and that's good. It's a more permanent bond. But these mechanical connectors, this is a picture of a fast connect. This mechanical connector, that index matching gel is good for 20 years. I'm not telling you to spec in this connector for your installs. I'm saying it's a damn good tool to have on your truck. $5 to be able to replace an end quickly in the field without any tools. $5 to get that customer up and running quickly. Have a couple of them in each person's bag. Instead of having to worry about swapping around, where's the splicer at, let's splice this. A mechanical connector is real easy to install. Married with a mechanical connector, this VFL right here. VFL is probably my favorite tool, if you can't tell, because I'm flashing at everything with this laser pointer. VFL does the same thing. So that VFL, when you're doing a mechanical connector, some people will argue that mechanical connectors, well, how do I know if they're working? One, did your signal go back up? Two, you can plug in your mechanical connector, and there will be a window on that connector, and if you see that red light, you're good. So that VFL is good for your mechanical connectors. So if somebody is thinking about adapting fast connects or mechanical connectors for doing quick repairs, get a $15 VFL. VFL, also an awesome tool. Do you guys outfit, hands up, do you outfit your technicians with VFLs? A couple nods? Yeah, about half? Yeah, man, open up your wallets. The other half, you guys got to get your techs VFLs. They're such an inexpensive tool and they're pretty versatile. So you can use that VFL to go inside of a cabinet, to go inside of a patch panel, at the NID, shine that light onto that connector, and you can quickly, easily identify where a bend might be in your cable routing. That light is going to leak out and show you where that issue is at. The other handy part of it is maybe your record keeping isn't that great, right? Maybe your records kind of are an issue. You're not the only one. So when you go to splice this fiber or do this install, you're like, ooh, I swear this customer down the road, that school, really think they're on that fiber. So one, you could use this live fiber identifier. Two, you could use this VFL for a trace. You're like, all right, I'm going to disconnect, shoot light down. Are you seeing light on your side? It's a great way to check continuity to make sure you're on the fiber that you're supposed to be if you're with another person. They'll be able to see that visual red light pointing on their hand just like that. I really like red lights. All right, so live fiber identifier, I mentioned that one already. You know what, I think a lot of contractors use these, maybe not as important for you telcos, unless you're doing your own in-house construction, your own in-house splicing, then I think it becomes more of a relevant tool. It is that, maybe the age-old battle of fighting with a CO tech of like, no, that fiber's live, I'm telling you. I know I spliced it a couple months ago downstream. Live fiber identifier is going to clamp on to your fiber. It's going to put a bend on it. And just like how we shoot a VFL through here, and if there's a bend on a fiber, that light leaks out, the live fiber identifier, it puts a bend on this fiber, and if there's live light going on there, it's going to detect that traffic. It's going to tell you the approximate power going through there and the direction and wavelength, depending on how fancy of a live fiber identifier you want to get. So yeah, they're fairly inexpensive tools. If you're doing in-house construction, I think it's a good tool to have in your bag. Last one, is the splicer. So most people are looking at core alignment splicers. This one is a Fuji 90S, and there's a lot of other core alignment splicers on the market. You don't have to have a core alignment splicer. If you are going to have a lot of drops and you're subbing out your construction and they're doing all the mainline splicing, you don't have to have a 90S. Now, if you're only going to have one splicer, I would recommend you get a core alignment splice machine. Absolutely. But if you are big enough where you need multiple splicers, I would say get one core alignment splicer and then a drop splicer. These drop splicers are about half the price as a core alignment splicer. And they're a little bit smaller form. That doesn't impact us a whole lot when we're doing our installs though. But if you need multiple splice machines, these core alignment splicers are powerful. They're about average 0.02 dB higher average loss than a core alignment machine. However, you can get on the machine a 0.00 dB loss splice. It just won't be as consistently low as a core alignment splice machine. With that clad alignment machine, I'm just going to add, if we think back to that dartboard where we had the picture of the yellow core and then the gray cladding, this clad alignment machine, it has no idea that there's a core. It has no idea. It's not looking at that. All it's doing is trying to add up the outside edge of that cladding and fusing that together. Whereas this core alignment machine, this is looking at just the core and it doesn't care about that cladding. So a consideration with these is if you are splicing a cable from 1990 when you first put in your first span of fiber and you have to go and splicing new fiber today to add a lateral or whatever, a clad alignment machine is going to struggle a lot because the, what's the fancy word, concentracy, the centerness of the core in that cladding is a whole lot more stringent today when it comes to manufacturer specs. That core is very close to center, and it doesn't matter which manufacturer. Whereas back in the 90s, they were doing their best. It wasn't always center. So when we're trying to splice different cables together with that clad alignment, as far as old versus new goes, the clad alignment machines will struggle there. Otherwise, absolutely great tool to have with one or two of your drop crews so that you don't have to manage moving splicers around or having an extra expensive splice machine. All right, some more tools. I love gadgets. So this is a new tool, fiber multimeter. Does anybody have a fiber multimeter, like a Exfo OX1 or AFL TS100? Anybody heard of these gadgets? Couple nods? All right. Everybody should go out and buy these. I don't sell them. I don't. So I'm neutral on this. The fiber multimeters. If I owned a telephone company, if I had my own little telephone company, I would go and I'd buy one core alignment machine, I'd buy one clad alignment machine, and then for my OTDR, I'd get a decked out OTDR for my CO. It'd be a modular where I could add different capabilities to it easily. But then every single OTDR after that is going to be this fiber multimeter. These things are less than half the price of this OTDR. Well, this isn't an OTDR, but this max tester right here, they're less than half the price. And these are going to find your distance, they're going to tell you your light levels, and they're going to identify where your faults are and what they might be. And they are fast. They do it in a matter of seconds. If your contractor that's doing your work wants to use one of these fiber multimeters, no, not so good. because you're going to want a .SOR file from your contractor. These aren't going to produce as rich of results when it comes to turning up your network, having rich .SOR files. But as a telco, your tech should be loaded with these OX1s or AFL's TS100s. They're very easy to use. It's hard to see in this picture, but we have red and green squares. Red squares are bad, green are good. You click on them, it'll tell you what the problem is and where it's at, much like what a max tester might do. So very powerful tool. Everybody should have these instead of a whole bunch of OTDRs. If you have more than one OTDR or you're looking at buying more than one OTDR, this is going to be a quick way for you to save your money, is getting one of these fiber multimeters. All right, the next tool up here, again, maybe not the most useful unless you guys are doing your own in-house splicing and construction. If your contractors are building your network, 100% without a doubt, they should be doing an OLTS test. The most popular OLTS tester on the market is a Exfo 945. OLTS testing, optical loss test set, is the only way to get actual loss. OTDRs, estimates. Splice machines, even worse estimates. This is the only way to get true loss with an OLTS tester. So when an engineer gives you your light budget and what your splices need to be at, what the attenuation is, what your splice machine tells you, what your OTDR tells you, doesn't matter. It's the OLTS tester. This should be part of your birth certificate. I've got 4 kids. I've got a lot of birth certificates. But your fiber birth certificate 100% absolutely should include a bidirectional OLTS test report. 100% undoubtedly. But these are not good troubleshooting machines. So if you don't have your own in-house splice crews, these are not good troubleshooting machines. Could you eventually find where trouble is? Yeah, you're going to break your network into segments using a light source power meter. Be like, all right, my light level's good here. All right, well, let's go to the next spot. Light level's good here. Okay, next spot. All right, it's bad here. All right, so the issue is somewhere around here. So it can help you segment where an issue is, but you're wasting a lot of time and resources doing so. So this is why we talk about OTDRs all the time. And I do feel like our industry, we do a poor job talking about all these less expensive tools. But it's because these OTDRs are so awesome. They are so incredibly powerful. And they're relatively simple machines. I feel like there's a little bit of mystery and shroud around them where we don't know exactly what they do. It's an expensive calculator. We know what the speed of light is by this really bad joke. It's 186,000 miles per second. So this OTDR, it spits out a pulse of light, and it knows how fast it's traveling. Am I over time? Wrap it up. All right. I was about to make a joke about having too many kids, but I won't go there. All right, so 186 miles per second, this OTDR shoots out that pulse of light, it's timing it, so that's how it's figuring out distance. It's figuring out how long does this light take to come back. But it's also looking at how the light comes back. So now let's take a look at, I'm going to skip this slide, so let's take a look at how this light is coming back. We're looking at kind of 3 main principles of what we see with our traces. Attenuation. For the most part, this is out of our hands. This is inherent loss within our fiber cable. That is what gives this OTDR trace the downward trend from upper left to lower right. Most cables are going to be around 0.25 dB per kilometer at 1550. At 1310, that number is usually 0.2 or 0.22. This is because of the Rayleigh backscatter. You don't need to know what that means. It's basically the impurities within the core of the fiber in the glass, so the light scatters, and it's just inherent, nothing you can do. Fusion splices. So a fusion splice is going to be an event right here where the power level just drops straight down. You'll see that it doesn't really go laterally too far, and if it does go laterally, there's some bigger issues. With splices, they look a lot like bends in cables. I'll show what that looks like briefly. So this is a loss in power. All right, so gainers. Occasionally we run into gainers. I was talking about splicing mismatched cables before. When we splice mismatched cables, I had a speech teacher for most of elementary school. She'd be proud of me. So we were talking about different attenuation rates of cables, right? If we were to splice a cable that had a different attenuation rate, we would have a gainer. So when we go to splice that, it's got a different attenuation rate, and it looks like we gain power. We're not gaining power. And when we go to splice that other chunk of that cable, you'll see where this trace continues. Right here at that bottom right, it is lower than where the trend of the upper left would be. So that would be the difference with both those splices in there. So gainers are because of different attenuation rates of our cables. Connectors. Connectors are the fun ones where I've got a lot of analogies with bars and whatnot. But confusion. So when we have a connector, we have this spike. That spike is when that light is coming back at that laser and it's confused. It doesn't know what is going on. And that's why there's a little bit of distance associated with a connector. From that left to that right, that's the distance associated with that connector just because it's confused. The more reflectance we have, the bigger that gap will be as far as distance goes. And that also, the higher the spike will be. There's also, and that's Fresnel reflection. The loss associated with any connector is going to be the difference of the upper left to the bottom right. A UPC connector will have a lower spike, APC will have a lower spike, a UPC will have a higher spike. Reflection, I like to think of this as like being inside of a bar for lunch, having a hamburger, a water, and a lot of times, there's not a lot of windows, poor lighting, and then you finish up, you walk out, and you're like, holy Jesus, my eyes! It's bright out the parking lot, your pupils are burning. That is what's happening right here. That small, tiny little air gap when we have those two connectors mated together, that's blinding the lasers, and that's where that confusion's coming from. And that's also why we should be using launch cables. Whenever we're testing, make sure we're using a launch cable. A receive cable is only critical if you are really interested what that last connector looks like right here. But a launch cable, it creates a dead zone for you to adapt to the light. So going back to that bar analogy, grabbing a hamburger for lunch, now instead of walking straight out that bar and being blinded by the light, we've got this long hallway, and there's a couple of scattered windows every now and then. As we go further down, there's more windows. By the time you open that door, your eyes are adjusted. That's what a launch cable is doing for us. All right, bends and cables. So going back to my terrible car analogies. So 1310, 1550, we had that El Camino and we had the semi-truck. That El Camino, 1310, when it's going through this cable, and right here, let's say instead of this dropping down, let's say that 1310 trace keeps going straight. It keeps going straight, and we would never know if there's an issue if we're only testing at 1310, because that wavelength is nimble. It's able to make U-turns on those one-way streets, whereas 1550, when we shoot this trace, and let's say that there's a bend in this cable right here, 1550 can't make that turn. 1550, our power level drops down right here. So if we shot only at 1310, we would not know that there was a loss there. If we shot only at 1310, we would not know there's loss. If we shot only at 1550, we wouldn't know if this was a splice or a bend. So that's why we want to shoot at two wavelengths. They provide a reference point for us. All right, lastly, real quick, is this is what a crack looks like. These are messy because a crack, It is a reflective event because light can still get through. So a crack can happen from closing a tray or a patch panel, or even somebody dropping a tool on a 250 micron fiber. So when that light goes through there, it's much like if you're driving and a bird hits your windshield and your windshield gets crystallized. You can still kind of drive, but it's a little bit dangerous. You should probably pull over and get that windshield fixed, or ride like Jim Carrey in Pet Detective. Sorry, lungs, getting sidetracked. So with those cracks, they're tough to shoot because it's going to be a reflective event, because all of a sudden light is coming back at that laser really weird, and some cracks are going to be worse than others. So this might be a really large reflective event where you're like, it is a connector, there is a problem. And then you go to your network records and you're like, there's no connector there. But then you're like, oh, our records suck, just like every other telephone company. Shoot. All right, let's go out there and try to figure this out. But yeah, these are reflective and loss events from the gap upper left to the lower right. I would say the biggest tell with a crack is it's reflective and it has a lot more loss than a connector. So that's going to be really the big tell, is a lot more loss, and if you have this crazy confusion still after it. Okay, thank you for your time, guys. I appreciate you coming here. I hope you learned at least one thing. I know everybody in here knows something more than me. I'd love to hear it. Come to me with any questions or stories you'd like to share. Thank you.